Mr. Speaker, the health of First Nations is just as important as the health of any one of us here. Changes to legislation that affect the whole population have to be presented to all members of the population from Yarmouth to Cape Breton. It's not going to happen until December 2006. January the 1st would be a more appropriate date, beginning the 1st of the year. New Year's resolutions come into effect on January the 1st. Be a good time to bring the law in on January the 1st. The New Year's resolution for a lot of people is to stop smoking or to quit smoking. It could be a resolution that this government could adopt, that this is when they're going to introduce the legislation. The total ban, Mr. Speaker, makes this legislation more easy to enforce. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no timelines. There's no clock set at 9 o'clock at night when you can or can't smoke. And, Mr. Speaker, I have to go on record as saying that presently there are a lot of clubs and organizations, especially those that have VLTs contained within their premises. I guess we'll have to refer to them as the blue room, because those rooms are blue with smoke, where people are in there playing the machines and smoking continually, causing great damage to their health, and yet enforcement is basically close to nil. Mr. Speaker, it would have been just as simple to protect the health of Nova Scotians, especially workers, 4 years ago when this first arose. As I said this morning in an interview, you're elected to make decisions, to stand up to be counted, and do, and I must quote from my seatmate, Mr. Terrio, when he said, "How can you get in trouble when you're trying to help somebody?" And that's what this is doing. Mr. Speaker, we're here to help people to improve their health, and it goes hand in hand with what the Minister of Health and Promotion is suggesting, active living. But those are noble things that to try to accomplish. But what I will address later on in the House, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that with all these noble things that are coming forward, the gymnasiums to affect the active living and exercise and get the population moving when we get them away from smoking, those gymnasiums, because we don't have insurance for these groups, they cannot access this. And I'm sure the Minister will work hand in hand with me to see that we can have these facilities open to the public. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the bill going to law amendments, and I will be voting for this bill and looking forward to see what the general public brings forth and take into consideration any and all that of their suggestions, and hopefully, Mr. Speaker, that this bill, like others, will not get watered down, that it will be a definite, across-the-board, level playing field. Sorry, guys, no smoking. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my seat and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. I'll recognize the member for Pictou West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to have a few moments here to speak on this bill, number 225. It's sort of got a long title to it, but it's basically the Smoke-Free Places Act. I guess it's officially an act to amend Chapter 12 of the Acts of 2002, the Smoke-Free Places Act. And it's basically a bill that will ban all smoking in indoor workplaces and in public places, wherever people are gathered. I guess the only exceptions being in long-term care facilities or nursing homes or similar institutions, mainly because that is their private home, and certainly people are free to vote or smoke in their private home if they so wish, and for persons in a care facility, that is their home. And I guess there's a designated smoking room just for that purpose. And many of those people, of course, are elderly and not able to get out and about. Perhaps they're in a wheelchair and certainly are probably not free to go outside and smoke a cigarette. The other part of the bill mentions around outdoor areas, patios that would be at a restaurant or a bar or lounge. And during the summer months, there's certainly a flurry of outdoor patios that appear in front of various restaurants and bars. There may be some difficulty with that, because how do you determine exactly where the line is between the indoors and the outdoors? If it's on a patio out on the sidewalk, is there a rope designating the line? But that might be a little harder to enforce exactly. But certainly on indoor enclosed spaces, I welcome this legislation. I think it's good for Nova Scotians, and my only regret is that it's not going to come into effect until December 1st, 2006, which is 14 months away, or almost, and the sooner the better. But, Mr. Speaker, as we know, smoking has been with us for, hundreds of years, I guess, and in my opinion, it's certainly been a major scourge on society. It's cost a tremendous amount of money. The health effects of smoking on our healthcare system, and it's shortened lives, and it's people have died from cancer and other diseases caused by smoking. So it's probably not unknown to members here the effects of smoking on people's health. But I just want to briefly point out a few things that are the direct cause of smoking in society. And I think we've all lost loved ones. We've all lost people that have been close to us because of various diseases that are directly linked to the disease of smoking. And I can think of in my own family, I lost an uncle. He was 69 years of age, and he smoked heavily, and he died of lung cancer certainly before his 70th birthday. And there's all of us are affected by the family members and friends that we've lost. In many cases, years short of their expected natural life cycle because of the effects either directly smoking or secondhand smoke that they have breathed in. So I call it a scourge, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to point out some of the health effects of smoking. These stats come from Health Canada and from the U.S. Surgeon General, and we all know that there's strong medical evidence that there's many diseases caused by smoking, and it affects all of us, right from the cradle to the grave, unfortunately, at any age, even Mr. Speaker, before babies are born. They're in the womb. There's well-known link between a mother's smoking and their effect on an unborn child. It affects infants and children, adolescents, us as adults, right up into our senior years. It's said that smoking causes genetic changes in the cells of a person's lungs, and that's what leads to lung cancer. Research shows that smoking tobacco causes other cancers of the digestive tract, of the throat, of the larynx, of the pancreas, cancer of the kidneys, of the stomach. They're all related back to the effects of people smoking. Other respiratory diseases, such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, various bronchitis and asthmas are caused by smoking. And it's certainly well known also that cardiovascular diseases such as heart attacks and strokes and angina are certainly very much related to smoking. So what is in a cigarette? What has been known to cause all these health diseases and concerns? Research shows that there's over 4,000 different chemicals found in cigarette smoke. More than 4,000 different chemicals that are there, and at least 50 of those are found in tobacco smoke, are known and are proven to cause cancer. Some of those are items like benzene, hydrogen cyanide, formaldehyde, tar. There's just a whole list, but at least 50 are cancer-causing in a proven fact. So when people smoke, all these items are going into your body, and they're causing every organ in our body to be affected by smoking. There's other studies, Mr. Speaker, that show that it only takes 7 seconds from the time somebody takes a puff on a cigarette to the time it enters our brain. 7 seconds. It's not very long for a puff of smoke to enter through our mouth and into our lungs and to hit your brain. So it's proven to be very addictive. It's mainly nicotine that is causing that addiction, but it's a deadly chemical that's causing many problems. Mr. Speaker, in 1988, the U.S. Surgeon General concluded that nicotine in tobacco is addictive. Well, I guess that's a well-known fact, but it wasn't until about 17 years ago that was made as a public fact by the Surgeon General. And in that year, he had 3 major findings around nicotine as an additive. He said that cigarette smoking and other forms of tobacco use are addictive. The nicotine in the drug and tobacco, it causes addiction. And finally, he said that nicotine addiction is similar to heroin or cocaine addiction. It's very, very strong. It's, I guess, what you call like a reinforcing drug. You need constant amounts to your body. You're craving it all the time. So nicotine is known to be extremely poisonous in large amounts, and I don't know if you remember, Mr. Speaker, the first time you might have smoked, but I think most people in society have probably at one time or another tried cigarettes, and some have stuck with it all these years, and some have quickly given it up. But it probably your first puff on a cigarette made you feel dizzy or made you feel sick, or some people say you turn green, but after you get over that initial scare, then you try it again, and next thing you know, you're addicted. I know personally, I didn't try cigarettes till I was about 23 years of age, and maybe that was fortunate in that I was later coming to it than some people. And I smoked Export A for a time, and was never a strong smoker, never a lot of cigarettes in one day, maybe 4 or 5 or half a dozen at any one particular day. But I probably became somewhat addicted for 3 years, and then one day I just asked myself, well, why am I smoking? And I couldn't think of any good reason, and I just said, I'm going to give it up. But it wasn't that easy. It wasn't like, I tried, so I'm just going to give it up, I'm not going to do it anymore. But at first I stayed away, but then within 2 or 3 days I was back at it, and I wanted to try it again. And it took 2 or 3 packs, I think, before I finally was able to give it up. And I was in my 20s, and again, I just asked myself, why am I smoking? And I just couldn't think of any good reason. I knew it was probably not good for my health, and probably it was easier for me to give it up because I was a little later coming to it than as a teenager. But it's certainly been very addictive to many, many people, and some just find it almost impossible to give it up. I can remember, Mr. Speaker, I had a gentleman contact me a couple of years ago that was very much addicted to cigarettes, and he'd just been diagnosed with lung cancer. He was 60 years of age, and he came to me because he had no income, and he needed to get on social assistance to try to pay for his medication, pay for his food and other necessities in life. And he said, I just have to have a cigarette. I just need that. In spite of the fact he was diagnosed with lung cancer, he could not give up the addiction that really was killing him. And unfortunately, about a month after that, he did die. But so some people, in spite of the fact they know it's killing them, they'll continue to smoke just because they are craving it, they're addicted, and it's what's in the cigarettes that it's been proven companies have put in there that make you buy it to keep it going. Anyway, it's tough sometimes to give up smoking, and it's more than willpower that's needed. Sometimes it's medication and patches and others that will help you to get over get over the addiction. Just one other factor I'll mention, Mr. Speaker. It's estimated those that are addicted to smoking, many of them will not live to see their 70th birthday, and often will suffer a quality of life that's far reduced during their latter years. And the average smoker will die about 8 years earlier than a non-smoker. So it's certainly something to think about. So, Mr. Speaker, there's proven over and over there's a strong link between smoking and all the various diseases that have been mentioned. Perhaps the worst case of all is secondhand smoke, when people are not smokers themselves, but they're unfortunately in an atmosphere or an environment that perhaps they have no choice. A child in a home where one or more parents are smokers, or in a vehicle where somebody is smoking and they're forced to breathe it in. That maybe is one of the saddest examples of all of how people are affected by other people smoking. They're breathing in the secondhand. And it's proven even pets are affected in a household by secondhand smoke. So, Mr. Speaker, those are some of the effects of smoking, and we all know it's cost our healthcare system hundreds of millions of dollars every year in this province, and billions of dollars across the country. And as was mentioned in the previous bill, there's some steps being taken to try to gather some of that money back from the big tobacco companies and to help pay for the tremendous healthcare costs that we are all paying. I just want to mention a letter that I received in the mail a few months ago. And Mr. Speaker, you may have also received this particular letter. It's from our Pictou County Health Authority, and signed by Dr. Morris Strasfield, the president of the medical staff of the Pictou County Health Authority. And he's pointing out the very great need that we should be bringing in smoke-free places in our workplaces and in public places. And he's asking and encouraging us to do all we can to bring on smoke-free legislation in this province. So it's certainly welcome that we do have this legislation here at this time. He's saying the only people that benefit from smoking are the tobacco lobbies and the tobacco companies. And certainly he points out that other jurisdictions like Vancouver, New York, London have all instituted smoking bans, and he also points out that the province of Quebec has instituted legislation to ban smoking completely, as have a number of municipalities in our province, Mr. Speaker. I certainly would commend the town of New Glasgow for their initiative in banning smoking in public places. It was not at the time necessarily a popular move, but certainly kudos to Councillor Manos and the Mayor Anne McLean of New Glasgow and others on council that took the initiative to ban smoking in that municipality. And I think this new legislation that comes in that will be province-wide, that will be blanketing the whole province, will certainly level the playing field and make it fair in all municipalities. Because right now, for example, in the town of New Glasgow, there's no smoking allowed in restaurants or bars or pubs or lounges or legions. But there is after 9 o'clock in neighboring towns like Trenton or Stellarton or Westville, or in the municipality, in the town of Pictou and so on. And so people that still wish to smoke are not patronizing businesses necessarily in the town of New Glasgow, and are actually going to other municipalities. And so I think this legislation will level the playing field and make it more fair for everyone. I guess the final thing I want to mention, Mr. Speaker, is about enforcement. And it's important that this bill has some teeth and that it will carry out what it's proposing to do, and that is to ban smoking in public places and in workplaces. And we all know, we've all heard of instances where patrons are still smoking in places that is banned, in towns where they've initiated a province-wide ban, or even in areas where before the 9 o'clock p.m. hour that there's smoking going on that should not be. So I assume it's up to the police forces in the towns to monitor the situation and to enforce the law of the province. But I know, as we all know, that there has been a blind eye at times turned to some of these situations, and I think it's important that enforcement be stepped up and that the people be allowed to smoke in where they choose, in private, in their own homes or their own vehicles or in the great outdoors, but not in public places or workplaces. I guess the final thing I'll mention here, Mr. Speaker, I do have a letter here from a concerned citizen that works in a workplace. It happens to be at Trenton Works in the town of Trenton in Pictou County, and he's concerned that the legislation that was passed in 2002 on January 1st of that year that banned smoking in workplaces is not being adhered to, and he's saying that while notices are put up in the lunchroom, he still has to put up with smoking there while trying to eat or drink his meal at lunchtime. And he feels it needs to be more protection, more enforcement, I guess, of the present law that allow people or that shouldn't be smoking where they should not be. So there's some work that has to be done around enforcement to make sure this bill is adhered to as is written in the legislation. So overall, Mr. Speaker, I certainly support the bill. I look forward to it becoming law of the province, and I guess I look forward to the next step in the phase of going to Law Amendments Committee. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise today and speak for a few minutes on the merits of Bill 225, amendments to the Smoke-Free Places Act. Really, this is a wonderful time for us to see Nova Scotia finally going to a full 100% ban on smoking in public places, both indoor and outdoor. As we know, this was brought forward 4 years ago and debated in the legislature, and the government made certain concessions. They compromised in some ways, against the wishes of a lot of Nova Scotians, because I think in the ensuing 4 years, what we've seen is a question of leadership from the municipalities of this province stepping forward and taking a stronger role than was advocated by the government in the bill that was previously passed. And what's so important is to see that the people of Nova Scotia have seen the merits of going to a 100% smoke-free ban. I can say in my own constituency that I've had a number of people write me and call me, and I've passed some of those letters on to the Minister of Health Promotion and encouraged him to bring forward this legislation, and have received letters back as well where he's indicated they had been looking at changes, and I was happy to see that. The letters from my area, in fact, included a letter from the Legion, from the Fairview Legion, which serves the people that live in Clayton Park as well, and it advocated a full 100% ban on smoking in indoor places. So even though we've heard a lot about certain groups or clubs maybe not wanting to have this because of any impact economically on their operations, I believe that people understand that this is a health issue that is greater than any other concern. Protecting the health of non-smokers and others who are going to be there, even for the smokers themselves, to limit the amount of smoking that's done. And I think we can all say that we've seen over our lifetime a huge change in attitude and custom, really, when it comes to smoking. And I, like many others, was raised in a home where my parents smoked and siblings smoked, and I, in fact, smoked for a short while. And I know that things have changed just dramatically in that period of time in terms of how acceptable it is. And I think as we make more and more places smoke-free, and this has come in over a period of time, beginning with the federal government and workplaces. It's become more and more unacceptable to smoke in public, and it just discourages people from starting this habit or from continuing it. And that is certainly what I want to see as we go forward. I want to support the wishes of Nova Scotians who, in a vast majority support the idea of smoke-free places. I also want to commend the government this time for going 100% on outside patios. I was very concerned that we'd be leaving more loopholes open, and if we do that, there's no end to the ingenuity of business. As long as you say that people can smoke in a certain designated area, even if it's outside, I envision that we'd have some very elaborate patios operating year-round in Nova Scotia. It's almost a certainty. And as I was mentioning, when the government first passed their bill on smoke-free places 4 years ago, the onus really fell to municipalities to begin debating this subject. They didn't really want it, but because the government had not gone all the way in terms of banning smoking, municipalities were left to grapple with this. And I think we should give really a lot of recognition and congratulations to CBRM's council, because they took the bull by the horns and went to that place that most Nova Scotians wanted, and that was a complete ban on smoking in CBRM. And that was followed with the same ban throughout Cape Breton Island. And that really showed the leadership that had been lacking here in the legislature, that, where the current government was unwilling to go to that length. As was mentioned 4 years ago, both the Liberals and the NDP members had supported a 100% ban, but that had not gone forward because we did not have enough votes in the legislature. But in municipalities, beginning with Cape Breton, the Cape Breton Regional Municipality went to the full ban, and that set the tone for other municipalities who followed. And I was part of a very cantankerous debate at HRM's council where this came up again and again. Loopholes were discussed, delays in implementation were discussed, allowing cigar bars ultimately remained in the bylaw. And it actually split our council evenly right down the middle. We had several votes in which we just had ties one after another. And at the time, I certainly supported the 100% ban on smoking in all places. But it was not, as I say, it was not an easy debate even there, and HRM did not do as well as Cape Breton Regional Municipality and other municipalities in terms of introducing a stronger ban. And so I'm very pleased to see the government go to the lengths they have in this current bill to agree with Nova Scotians and the wishes of Nova Scotians that we protect the health of our young people, the young people that are working in bars and restaurants who need those jobs. A lot of them are university students and high school students. They need the money to pursue their education. And I've had a number of parents who have specifically spoken to me about their concerns for their children who have to have jobs in places where smoking was allowed. So I think it's really important that we've taken this step to protect the workers in those establishments and also the patrons, the people who want to go out for an evening and don't want to be bombarded by secondhand smoke. So I realize that overall this has taken a bit of time. We're sorry it wasn't done sooner, but we appreciate the efforts that the minister has made, I'm sure within his own caucus and cabinet, to see that this does come forward. And I realize that it's better late than never. We're glad to see it here now. I wish you'd done it 4 years ago. However, Mr. Speaker, it certainly has my full support, and I know that constituents in Clayton Park will welcome this as a positive improvement to the health of our province. So with those comments, I would like to offer my support to the bill, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Recognize the member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to speak on another bill. Concurrently, as a matter of fact, the Bill 222 last evening, and again the Bill 225 today, with respect to smoking. Of course, Bill 222 was a piece of legislation that, in fact, allowed the municipality the opportunity to sue tobacco companies to incur the health costs that the municipality might encounter as a result of people smoking. This piece of legislation, Bill 225, the Smokes-Free Places Act, is another piece of legislation that I commend the government for bringing forward. the government shows a progressive action when and I don't use that in the terms of its political party, but it shows a progressive action by way of bringing these pieces of legislation forward. And I want to say, back in 2002 when we debated, the restrictions of tobacco in the workplace and establishments, public establishments, and of course entertainment places, we had recognized that even then the government should have taken it one step farther. But Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to speak long, but I want to get the minister's ear, and particularly on the issue with respect to his explanatory note. And if in the explanatory note of this bill, the minister indicates exception of designated smoking rooms and healthcare facilities for acute or long-term care of veterans in licensed nursing homes and residential care facilities and in homes for the aged and disabled. I would want the minister to know that I have no problem with individuals having the right to smoke in their own home. What I do have a problem with, Mr. Speaker, and the minister should become aware of this, is that many individuals are employed in these environments, particularly in licensed facilities that are managed by the province, and particularly persons who are home care workers, particularly individuals who seek employment through the self-managed attendant care program, who are hired by disabled persons to look after their needs. If in fact the minister cannot put a proviso in this piece of legislation that restricts individuals from smoking in their home, in their environment, while the persons are employed into that environment, then I certainly would appreciate the minister giving some serious consideration to that. I don't think that anyone should be required to go into a facility that may endanger them. Rather, that home is in a licensed nursing home or not. I think that we as government need to protect those individuals. So I hope the minister is listening intently to this piece of legislation, whereby we introduce a proviso that will restrict the government from doing that. We all know about the Helen Crow situation, where the individual was a waitress in a hotel in Ottawa, in the restaurant in Ottawa, and that person ended up with emphysema and lung disabilities to the point whereby she could no longer be employed. As a result of that, had to go on workers' compensation. I would not want to see increased payments to the workers' compensation as a result of my government causing individuals to go into places where they're employed, where they're employed and people are allowed to continue to smoke. So I really want the government to give some serious consideration with respect to this very important issue. Also, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the outdoor patios, I have some concern with smoking around the outdoor patios, because although there is a defined boundary specifying the outdoor patio, will people be able to step outside the rope or the bounded area of that outdoor patio and continue to smoke? These are the kind of questions that need to be asked. Is there going to be a distance from the outdoor patio where people are going to be restricted from smoking? Or are they going to be able to just stand outside that rope or partitioned off area and have a cigarette? That is the question that needs to be asked as well. The issue around policing, I do know that my colleague from Sackville-Quebecoit brought the issue up around who's going to police the legislation once it becomes effective. Will it become bylaws of the municipality for them to require the policing? Will the policing be a joint effort between the province and municipal units? And when I say a joint effort, will it be by those who license the establishments to make certain that, in fact, there is no smoking in that establishment when they license the establishment? Also, who will pay for the policing? Will it be the responsibility of the municipal units to pay for that upfront cost of hiring by law enforcement officers or policing officers to police establishments? Because this is going to be an extremely difficult process. As you know, when we dealt with the piece of legislation back in 2002, we dealt with a piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, that many of the entrepreneurs and businesses who in fact were involved with drinking establishments, pubs and bars, worked around these facilities of corridoring off part of their establishments to allow for smoking. 99% of those establishments, Mr. Speaker, were around the VLTs and the video lottery machines when in fact they were cordoned off. Yet the Gaming Corporation or no one made comment with respect to individuals who might be engaged in entertainment such as video lottery machines for purposes of gaming entertainment. They went into those smoke-filled areas. There were a number of people who had felt that this was certainly not controlled. It was unmanageable, and that some individual proprietors even felt to the point whereby some of them were unfairly treated compared to others. I do know that I represent a constituency that has a high number of drinking establishments, pubs, bars, restaurants, and even private clubs. The policing of a private club is something that I'm going to be able to watch very closely, because I don't think the minister will have it within his power or within the authority of the municipality to continuously police those private clubs. The minute someone comes in and goes out again, someone will be smoking. Well, you know, what can they do? How can you control it? It's going to be a difficult control. And I don't know, but I do believe that in the province of Ontario, there is a court case now before the Supreme Court Canada, if it hasn't already been resolved, with respect to the right of a government's ability to restrict private clubs from their particular activities. I do believe that the minister has looked very closely at this legislation, and he mentions private clubs in this piece of legislation, Bill 225, but it's a matter of if it will stand the test of time. All legislation, including this piece of legislation, must stand the test of time. Mr. Speaker, there are going to be significant changes with respect to how individuals manipulate this piece of legislation. My only hope is, Mr. Minister, is that you, along with your department, is able to have and give assurances to Nova Scotians who are looking forward to this piece of legislation, to give assurances to them that in fact there will be the capabilities to police this new piece of legislation. And I do want to hearken back once again, Mr. Speaker, to the area of nursing homes, long-term cares, and licensed facilities. The minister is aware that his government is responsible for these facilities. The minister is aware that his government, in many cases, have individuals who are employed by government and or government agencies contracted through the government to provide services to individuals who are living in these facilities of long-term care. I think the minister needs to recognize that there needs to be an environment where there is assurances by people who are employed in that profession are in fact protected. And they need to know that they're protected, Mr. Speaker. They certainly need to be made very much aware that government is on their side and that they will be protected whatever. I quite frankly don't see why the government can't introduce a proviso, even for that short period of time in which people are going in, addressing the needs of the person in long-term care, the person who is in a veterans facility, as long as they're protected while they're employed and it's restricted to the period of time in which they're in that environment, that no one can smoke. It's very important to know that these are the kind of things that happen. Also, Mr. Speaker, I'm a bit concerned about the comments made by the First Nations, because it gives me the indication that this government hasn't been in consultation with the First Nations around this piece of legislation. And I don't know if the government's been in consultation with a lot of individuals, but around this piece of legislation, there needs to be some consultation. I know that honorable members had made mention that government has always said that when it introduces this piece of legislation that it would consult Nova Scotians. Well, First Nations people are Nova Scotians as well. And when I hear comments from the First Nations community that in fact they are not going to abide by this piece of legislation, or they may not be abiding by this piece of legislation, and that they would have to look at what their rights are and what impact it has economically on them, because they are looking to become economically self-sufficient and sustaining, and this may have an impact on some of their entrepreneurial businesses out there. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to know the government is going to go back and consult with the First Nations community, because I think that despite this piece of legislation being gleamed as being province-wide, and that it will level the playing field, there are some concerns by the communities out there that in fact it doesn't level the playing field. Excuse me. And one important piece of all legislation is to make certain that in fact it levels the playing field, and that the piece of legislation must be a piece of legislation that will stand the test of time, it will benefit all Nova Scotians, and that all Nova Scotians will have fair and just treatment by such legislation. In this particular case, as I've said once again, there is some very real concerns. I do know that we won't have to deal with ventilated units and so on within the private clubs and the establishments now, simply because it will be totally smoke-free. So restaurants, lounges, beverage rooms, private clubs, cabarets, or whatever you may mention, places of bingo operation, ventilation facilities will now be to do the circulation of real fresh air, and not just simply tobacco smoke, which in fact is, as you and I know, dangerous to everyone's health. I think the important part of this is that we won't have to worry about that anymore. I want to say that we will no doubt hear from municipalities across this province when this piece of legislation goes to the Red Room, if we haven't already heard. And I'm sure the government members have probably, hopefully, consulted with municipal units on the policing of this piece of legislation. Once again, I say it's easy enough to craft legislation, but it's far more difficult to police it. And if, in fact, this piece of legislation is left up to the municipality, then the municipality will say that we don't have the resources and the people to do it. Then it certainly will make a farce of this piece of legislation. I think, Mr. Speaker, that many of my colleagues have spoken about the negative aspects of smoking. There's no need to go into the statistical information that's available. The minister is already very much aware of that, and he's very much aware of what has been said in this legislative assembly with respect to that. But I do want to say once again, Mr. Speaker, that this is a good piece of legislation. It's a matter of how you make it excellent, simply by making sure that it is enforceable. And if this legislation is going to be enforceable, Mr. Speaker, then government needs to consult, and government needs to make sure that all aspects of this legislation is enforceable. It also might be advantageous for the government to acknowledge that it can be complaint-driven, that if individuals identify areas where smoking is occurring or happening, and yet it is not reported, then individuals can certainly call a number and make sure that the complaint is set forward so that an officer who would be responsible, either municipally or provincially, would be able to go out and view that establishment to see if they are, in fact, breaking the law once this becomes proclaimed as legislation. The other point, once again, Mr. Speaker, it's a good piece of legislation, no question. I do hope that the minister looks at this legislation very carefully, and that, in fact, the point that I brought forward with respect to those individuals who are employed within the explanatory note facilities, and there is assurances that there will be protection for those individuals who may be employed within that explanatory note part, that I certainly am one who will support this piece of legislation. I'm not going to, even though it's a good piece of legislation, now, Mr. Speaker, it's not one that I'm going to say that I wholeheartedly endorse or support until it comes back across from the Red Room into the Legislative Assembly to be proclaimed as a piece of legislation or to receive royal assent. And that will happen, of course, through a third reading of this piece of legislation. Once again, I will get the opportunity to speak to this. I do know, and anyone who has particular concerns, we will have heard them, and we will be enlightened, Mr. Speaker, on what changes, if any, they suggest that should come forward. Having this opportunity to speak on this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, for this moment, I want to thank you for giving me this time. Thank you.
Recognize the honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly pleased to rise today to speak on the amendments to the Smoke-Free Places Act introduced last week by the Minister of Health Promotion. Certainly after 25 years in the teaching profession and working to eradicate smoking, certainly in the school community in which I taught, to see this very progressive piece of legislation come forward is indeed to be commended. I know the first efforts 4 years ago were a little bit like what happened in my school in the early 1980s when a couple of teachers, I being one of them, finally got tired of the blue cloud of smoke filling the staff room, especially during lunch hour. And the first effort was to put in a smoke eater, and of course that was going to solve the problem. So the same way government went part way with their legislation in 2001, and finally we did take that all-important vote, and we decided to have a smoke-free staff room. So certainly the time has come for Nova Scotia to take that kind of forward step and to have 100% smoke-free places. Along with the Department of Health Promotion and their work over the past few years to do a widespread education program, I think the efforts of the community health boards certainly need to be recognized in the Chamber for the work that they did. Certainly last year, when they appeared with their 12,000 person signature petition, along with Dr. Rob Strang from Doctors Nova Scotia. Certainly those were very, very strong pitches put forth for increasing the strength of our legislation here in the province. And the community health boards, of course, have been doing a lot of education in their own right, along with the Nova Scotia Heart and Stroke Foundation. So we've had a lot of significant work going on. And the arguments for this piece of legislation, looking at a few of the health statistics that impact on our province, certainly in my view, it is substantiated to the full degree. And especially at a time in the history of our province, when we're spending about 47, 48% of our budget in the healthcare system, we certainly need to be looking to the next generation when that percentage can, in fact, be reduced. And one of the leading ways in which we can reduce this, of course, is to reduce the demands for cancer care, and especially with lung cancer. Lung cancer, which is, of course, a direct result of smoking in many cases, accounts for 33% of cancer deaths in males in Nova Scotia. And now it's up to 23% of deaths in females. So these kinds of statistics, along with the mortality rates, are again very, very compelling. Lung cancer, 13% in males, 15% in females survive after 5 years. So we do have those kinds of reasons from the point of view of the health of Nova Scotians and future health to do something about it now, since it is over time that we need to be making those kinds of changes. One of the statistics which certainly is very discouraging is that the annual increase of lung cancer in Nova Scotia is 3.6%. So again, we haven't reached a point at which it is starting to plateau. And speaking of the plateauing, if we take a look at the increases, we see that in Nova Scotia among females, different than other parts of Canada. In Nova Scotia, the rates for lung cancer of females is still increasing. And of course, that is certainly a discouraging element. One of the things that about the bill, however, which I feel is unfortunate, is that this bill will not come into effect until December 1st, 2006. And still for the workers in our bars, pubs, clubs, and so forth, it's another over a full year that secondhand smoke will be part of their workplace, and certainly one of the hazards to their health. It's a bill that I was hoping would in fact see it's not just introduced in the House, but that it's passing during this session, which I guess hopefully will be passed, but its implementation would be in fact much sooner. One of the realities in Nova Scotia is that from the point of view of the economics of selling cigarettes, it's a revenue generator of $178 million. It is again my hope that the Office of Health Promotion would in fact take some of those dollars and work on one of the staggering statistics within the 20%. Within the 20% of Nova Scotians who still smoke, the age group, the cohort of 20 to 24 years, 33% of that age group are smoking. So that's a statistic that is on the rise in Nova Scotia. So it's certainly one that I feel should be have some of the targeted funding. And the other targeted funding area would again be females overall, and especially the young age group of 15 to 19, which is seeing a continued increase in taking up smoking. The reality is, of course, that it is a very, very powerful addiction. I remember a little experiment two of my friends at university decided to engage in, and they were non-smokers, and they decided that, I can smoke for 6 weeks and then quit immediately. Well, the reality was they discovered that nicotine is indeed a very, very powerful addiction, and they weren't able to quit smoking on the projected date in which they said they would. So I think this is a step in the right direction. British Columbia has been a leader, and it is the first province in Canada to go below 20% of its population in the non-smoking category. So we certainly, I think, with increased legislation, greater numbers of Nova Scotians will hopefully kick the habit. One of the real concerns, of course, as voiced by my colleague from Dartmouth North, is how this bill will truly take form when it is brought into law on December 1st, 2006. Hopefully, there will be real teeth to make sure that indeed it is enforced in all places across the province. So with that comment, Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to certainly speak in favor of this legislation.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise and speak just for a few minutes on the merits of Bill number 225, the amendments to the Smoke-Free Places Act. Mr. Speaker, I don't think there's anybody who would argue that this it's a good bill, that many have said in this province, said in the past, and continue to say it's been a long time coming. A long time coming. That's the only problem we have here, Mr. Speaker, is that this bill, simply put, states that in over a year and a month from now, this will come into effect. But the problem is, what happens between now and then? How many people are going to be affected between now and then by smoking? Now, Mr. Speaker, there's an old cliche that says there's nothing worse than a reformed smoker. And I am that old cliche. Leave out the old part, Mr. Speaker, but I am that cliche. I'm a reformed smoker, but forced to do that, Mr. Speaker, because as previous speakers have said, and I don't want to get into the addiction part of it, we all know how powerful an addiction smoking is. We know what cigarettes contain. We know they're bad for your health. We know that they kill people. It's a fact. Nobody argues that any longer, Mr. Speaker. Nobody argues that. But the fact of the matter is that from the time that we actually put this into effect, the time that the government has said this will take place on December 1st of next year, 2006, there are going to be people who are harmed by the fact that this legislation is not effective until that date. And we have to ensure in order for legislation to be effective, it has to ensure that all individuals, doesn't matter whether they work at bars or pubs or whatever they do, it has to ensure that all individuals in this province are protected and are protected equally. It doesn't matter. The impact of secondhand smoking and secondhand tobacco smoke doesn't go away just because you're enclosed in a designated room. It doesn't go away if it's 9 o'clock in the night. There are young people, because it's predominantly young people who are employed in bars and restaurants as servers, as bartenders, and so on. It's predominantly young people that over the course of this time, the year and a month or so, are going to be in establishments inhaling secondhand smoke. And that secondhand smoke is going to lead to the many diseases that it leads to. And we all know what they are, Mr. Speaker. So it's unfortunate that such a positive bill, and it is a positive bill, and everyone admits that, but it's very unfortunate that a positive bill like this has to wait so long to come into effect. It's also unfortunate that it's had such a rocky road to travel so far. You know, it has to, if legislation, again, is going to be effective in this province, it has to apply equally across the province. And we all know, starting with the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, they've had better legislation than what we're proposing for a long time. Better legislation, I should say, than we have right now, has been in effect for a long time. Mr. Speaker, the number of people who smoke, I would suggest, in Cape Breton, in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, would be, on an average, higher than many other parts of this province. But the Cape Breton Regional Municipality had the foresight to say 100% smoking, let's go ahead with that bylaw, in the toughest place that we could possibly put it, and I would suggest that would be in Cape Breton because of the large number of smokers that were there. It met with very little resistance, Mr. Speaker, very little resistance. And as a matter of fact, I would suggest that it's probably the reason that a large number of people in Cape Breton have stopped smoking. That gave them the incentive, and sometimes it has to be that case. The government and the Minister of Health Promotion is quick to put out figures that say the rate of smoking is decreasing in this province. And it is, Mr. Speaker, but there are alarming stats within those statistics that we should be very careful to consider. The rate of young people in this province that are starting to smoke is rising. The rate of young women who are starting to smoke is still on the increase. There are some big, big problem areas within those statistics that we use on smoking in Nova Scotia that the Minister knows, Mr. Speaker, and we all know have to be conquered. We have to do something about them because we can't continue just to say an overall average that our smoking rate is actually down when the people who are going to drive that average up over time, young people, teenagers, the numbers are not there. The Minister, Mr. Speaker, knows that, and the government knows that. They aren't there. They aren't there to the extent that they have been. Now, Mr. Speaker, there have been many health ministers throughout this government that have attempted to try and do something about smoking in this province. And I'll be the first to admit there's a former minister of health who's now the Minister of Education, as a matter of fact. You remember the legislation that came, well, whatever that was, I guess it was legislation, an attempt at legislation. 4 years ago, we proposed the solution was easy. This should have been done, hey, put it in. We were there 4 years ago. We were there 4 years ago. We wanted to stop smoking. Everybody knows it's the right thing to do, Mr. Speaker. So, if you take a look at it, this government, and in particular, what happens in this case, we've seen what happens here. The Minister of Health Promotion makes a statement. The Minister of Justice steps outside the chamber and makes another statement. Before you know it, we have First Nations peoples in this province who are fighting with the provincial government over the fact that they weren't consulted on what's going to happen with their peoples and this smoking legislation. So again, we're in a crisis situation. Here we are proposing a 100% ban in over a year from now, but at the same time, we have First Nation peoples in our province who are arguing with the Justice Minister and the Health Promotion Minister as to whether or not this actually includes where they live. So there are some problem areas. As I said, we've traveled a rocky road to get here, and that rocky road is not over yet, Mr. Speaker. Before we can get to that, you have to negotiate. You have to consult, Mr. Speaker. Probably would have solved what we saw the other day, the display that we saw the other day between the Justice Minister and what we witnessed in this House. And predictably, Mr. Speaker, the government failed to do any kind of negotiations or consultations with First Nations people. And it's unfortunate that we won't see a positive result out of that as yet. Mr. Speaker, we have what we have before us now is a bill that I agree will be much easier to enforce. It's pretty simple to determine whether or not the law is being obeyed or disobeyed. I'm extremely pleased to see that the legislation will include outdoor patios and so on, Mr. Speaker. It's never mind, we can't go halfway with this legislation anymore. We have to go all of the way. The government has at least realized that. It would have been just as simple to protect the health of Nova Scotians, and especially those who are working in places where there is smoking 4 years ago. We should have done it then, and still waiting until next December for this to become legislation. But in closing, Mr. Speaker, it's suffice to say, I guess, that this is the right thing to do. It's unfortunate we have to wait that long. I sincerely wish that the minister had pushed the agenda further and pushed it ahead so that this would have taken effect perhaps on December 1st of this year instead of next year. But having said that, we support this bill. We look forward to future deliberations, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll recognize the oh, I'm sorry. Another speaker. Yes, I'll recognize the member for Preston.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be quite brief. I, too, am going to support this bill. I went through many hours of deliberation and discussion at the Halifax Regional Council when I was a councillor, and didn't totally support the program they put in place at the time, although I'm against smoking in public places and always have been. And but I think, as a previous speaker said here, my honourable colleague, that the only problem I have with this bill is the time that it's going to be implemented. And I would strongly encourage the government to move from their date to an immediate date to make these places smoke-free, with some leeway for establishments to get their sort of any changes they have to do in their structures or whatever the case may be to allow for that. As we all know, smoking causes so much grief for so many people in the community, and it's a needless grief. You see people that are suffering years later with lung diseases and all kinds of other diseases, and people indeed with lung diseases that never smoked. And when you look at that and wonder if indeed it was a result of secondhand smoke, as we've learned now is just as dangerous or more dangerous than smoking yourself, it's pretty bad when you affect people that around you, and especially when parents affect young children and probably get them to smoke. I know, as I said the other day on the previous bill, that I grew up in a family, and my father smoked, my mother didn't, fortunately, but my father finally quit many years later, as many people did at that time. But again, I'm going to be very brief today. I would just encourage the government to move forward the date that they'll implement this much sooner than it is, and move forward with it as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognize the Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the comments which have been made during second reading so far, Mr. Speaker, as the bill moves forward. Mr. Speaker, again, the legislation in front of us is the toughest legislation in the country. Certainly, I know there's general feelings around the room that we want to move forward with it, and I know that some feel that as we could have moved forward faster, but we are where we are, and we have tried to strike a balance, Mr. Speaker, between the need to protect Nova Scotians from a health perspective, and also the need to recognize that, yes, indeed, many businesses have invested in those smoking rooms. So we have struck that balance, I believe, in the time frame set throughout this legislation. I have met with health groups on this legislation. I have met with groups such as Lounge and Beverage Room Associations, groups such as Canadian Food and Restaurant Association and others to discuss this and to be frank with them about what we're putting forward, Mr. Speaker. So I look forward to continuing with the movement of this bill. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move second reading of the Bill number 225, the Smoke-Free Places Act.
Motion is for second reading on Bill number 225. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Contrary minded? Motion is carried.
Bill 225, entitled an act to amend Chapter 12 of the Acts of 2002, the Smoke-Free Places Act.
I order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments, and I recognize the Deputy House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under government business, public bills for second reading, I call Bill number 228, the Social Workers Act.
Bill number 228. Now recognize the Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to move second reading of the Acts to amend Chapter 12 of the Acts of 1993, the Social Workers Act. What this does, Mr. Speaker, is, I guess you could say, it helps modernize the Act. There are some clauses in the existing legislation which don't appear to meet the needs of the modern social worker. And as I understand, the changes this bill does have the support of the social workers organizations here in the province. What it does, Mr. Chairman, the change to Clause 1 enables the members of the Board or examiners to choose a replacement for the chair of the board if the board is unable to attend the meeting. In other words, they can select or elect or nominate, whatever it is, a temporary chair. It also, Clause 2, permits a member of the board to be reappointed to a third consecutive term. The previous legislation allowed 2 terms. This is to provide for continuity. Clause 3 requires a graduate from another province to establish a minimum of 2 years experience in social work before that person can be entered on the Register of Social Workers, and that means that people from outside the province are now on an equal footing with people inside the province. And Clause 4 allows a person who's completed the requirements for a degree or a diploma to be registered without delay. In other words, they get the degree or diploma, then they can go in the register immediately. And Mr. Speaker, those particular changes to that act are ones which will make the Social Workers Act function more effectively and in more consistent with modern thinking about the role of a social worker. And Mr. Speaker, I say with those few words, I'm pleased to move second reading of the Act to amend Chapter 12, the Acts of 1993, the Social Workers Act.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm really pleased to have an opportunity during second reading of Bill 228, an act to amend Chapter 12 of the Acts of 1993, the Social Workers Act. I agree with the minister in that these are basically housekeeping amendments. They were developed to address difficulties in the legislation which have become apparent as the Nova Scotia Association of Social Workers regulates its profession. And the amendments are meant to strengthen the regulatory process and thus to provide better protection for the public. But second reading also gives me an opportunity to briefly discuss the role of registered social workers in this province, and particularly as it relates to their employment with various provincial government departments. Registered social workers play a valuable role in the government's workforce, especially within the Department of Health and the Department of Community Services. They're often dealing with individuals and families in crisis, and you could say that they are the front-line workers whose training and experience and professionalism provide the caring and help that Nova Scotians expect from their government. And they provide this during difficult life crises and also in an ongoing manner and providing ongoing support to people with long-term conditions or problems. And this raises an important issue, and that's why it's important to have registered social workers in these roles. Social workers learn a very specialized body of knowledge in their education and training, and they practice from a social justice perspective. And this body of knowledge equips them with skills and a perspective that other non-social workers would not have. Even more importantly, social workers are guided by a code of ethics to which they all must adhere. Non-social workers are not bound by the code. Now, the Department of Community Services, for example, has its own code of ethics, but this deals mostly with conflict of interest and doesn't address all the other areas found in the social workers' code of ethics. And I think we would all relate to the value of the social workers' code because it's based on 6 main values: the value and worth of the individual, pursuit of social justice, service to humanity, integrity in practice, confidentiality, and competence. And I don't think any of us would disagree with any one of those. So it's important to have that as a complementary code of ethics to the government, especially the Department of Community Services' own code. Another reason that social workers are important to employ within government services is that social work is regulated within our province. And it means that there are mechanisms in place to protect the public through registration, complaints, and discipline process. And that's not the case for non-social workers. Now, there seems to be a trend. You may be wondering what I'm leading up to, but there seems to be a trend, especially within the Department of Community Services, to change job descriptions so that they no longer require registered social workers to do many of the department's functions. Now, social workers have a unique and much-needed role in government service. So my suggestion is the government should be valuing their contribution and supporting their professionalism and work rather than undermining it. And I think this is a serious trend that needs to be looked at by the government, because professional and registered social workers provide a unique function in their service. So in closing, I want to suggest again that the amendments to the Social Workers Act provide an opportunity not only to strengthen the regulatory process and thus again provide better protection for the general public, but we need to remind ourselves why we employ social workers within government departments. So it's for these reasons that I applaud the association, Nova Scotia Association of Social Workers, for bringing forward these amendments and support their going to law amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in my place in support of Bill 228 and with the amendments presented to this minister by the Council of Nova Scotia Social Workers Association. The legislation, Mr. Speaker, provides for the association a mechanism for board members to serve for 3 terms instead of 2, and allows social work graduates to register without delay as candidates for membership, and requires members of other social work associations to have a minimum of 2 years' experience before being admitted as members and able to practice social work in Nova Scotia. I think this is a very important consideration, Mr. Speaker. We have no problems with these changes as long as the changes brought forward are the actual changes requested. Sometimes what shows up here in one form ends up trying to be shoved through in another form during debate, and I would hope that the minister, who obviously is aware of these changes, would pay particular attention to some of the good work that's being done by these social workers. And I would be remiss, Mr. Speaker, if I did not spend a few minutes honoring the profession of social work. Mr. Speaker, these are a group of professionals who work diligently to support individuals, families, and communities across this province. They oftentimes do so, Mr. Speaker, with little fanfare and oftentimes with little respect from this government. Some of that was witnessed earlier today in question period, Mr. Speaker, when the minister tried in vain to justify his position on a number of fronts regarding the whole Department of Community Services here today. Mr. Speaker, the primary mission of the social work profession is to enhance human well-being and help meet the basic human needs of all people, with particular attention to the needs and empowerment of people who are vulnerable. And that's a key point, Mr. Speaker, people who are vulnerable, those people who live among us who certainly need an advocate, and social workers have been strong advocates over the years for those people who live among us in less conditions and satisfactory conditions than some people in this House today live in. And I think attributes the minister would do well in paying particular attention to. Social workers promote social justice and social change with and on behalf of their clients. The mission of the social work profession is rooted in a set of core values. These core values, Mr. Speaker, embraced by social workers throughout the profession's history, are the foundation of social work's unique purpose and perspective. And they are service, social justice, dignity and worth of the person, importance of human relationships, integrity, and competence, Mr. Speaker, which certainly, although it's listed last here, is certainly a very important attribute. These core values reflect what is unique to the social work profession. Mr. Speaker, I truly believe that we might need more people in the Department of Community Services who possess these values, actually working within the department. And Mr. Speaker, which brings up a point that I've raised in this House a number of times regarding the need for the Department of Community Services to employ more social workers and less bean counters. You know, in a scrum earlier today, we heard the minister talking outside this House about the need to balance his budget, and that if he didn't claw back assistance given to people in need in this province because of overpayments, then the public accounts would bring him to task for not balancing his budget. Mr. Speaker, that is a terrible statement for a Minister of Community Services to make, that it's more important for him to balance his budget than it is to look after basic human needs of people in this province who are indeed in need. However, under this government, we have watched the whittling down of professional social work and instead have witnessed an increasing number of employees whose sole mission is to watch the bottom line. One of the key operative words in the Department of Community Services today in this province is clawback. That is a word that's used daily now in the community services world in this province. And Mr. Speaker, I said outside the House, and I'm saying it in here, this minister, this current Minister of Social Services, is a poster boy for everything that's wrong with community services delivery in this province. He is the ultimate poster boy. And these social workers who are actually moving to strengthen their position need to do so in order to keep pace with the poster boy. Hopefully they will pass the poster boy if he's still in that position, and I certainly hope that the Premier in his wisdom will come to a sensus in regards to the Minister of Community Services and do the right thing and replace that minister with somebody who actually cares about the department he's heading up, or maybe actually understands the department he's heading up. Social workers are trying to strengthen their organization. They're doing so for the protection of the people they serve. Too bad the minister wouldn't do the same. Mr. Speaker, in my opinion, social workers have one of the most important jobs to do on behalf of government, and Mr. Speaker, they need to be given the respect and the latitude to do so. Computers in that department should be perhaps be replaced with the integrity of the workers and the advice that these workers could bring to the social service department in this province. Instead of listening to the bean counters, this minister should be listening to social workers in this province who are out there trying to do the best for people who are less fortunate than we are. Mr. Speaker, I'll probably have some more to say on this bill when it goes to law amendments and back for committee of the whole House, but I can tell you that our party supports this bill, and we will be supporting the bill right through the process. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Recognize the member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and this is the first opportunity for me to speak during this session with you in the chair. I welcome you back to that position of honor and responsibility. Bill 228, of course, deals with one of those types of professions, and I think maybe one of the compliments you can always receive if you're in a particular profession, it's a compliment, but it might be a backhanded one when you run into people who say, now there's a job I never want to do. Now at times, Mr. Speaker, in a previous career, in certain social situations, as a school administrator and a school teacher, many of my friends would say to me, now there's a job I never would want to do. And they're talking about myself as a teacher. You know, I know, Mr. Speaker, I know you'll share this with me. I don't get to that much of that these days, and considering what we do as a profession, if you call our profession a challenge when it comes to bringing forth legislation day in, day out. But here's a job, a social working position, that let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, it's not a position that I certainly would be prepared to do. And over the years, I can tell you that I had the opportunity to work with some very professional people in that field. As a school principal, there were so many occasions when we called upon social workers to assist us with some of the decisions involving the young people under our care. And it's amazing how teenagers confide in people they trust. It's amazing how teenagers who are faced with all kinds of conflict, personal and otherwise, how if they find someone they can trust and confide in, they need that person for their assistance and their advice. And in many cases, in the situations where I was involved as a school teacher, there were invaluable supports given by social workers. Young men and young women who cared in a very professional manner, but in a very personal manner, Mr. Speaker, about the particular case. And they don't necessarily call them cases. They tell them, of course, by their real name, some of the young men and women which they were assisting us with as these young people were facing the challenges ahead of them, not just in school, but socially, at home, and with many other opportunities in life. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I became even more fortunate when I was looking for an office after my first successful election campaign, and I was directed to the Beachville Lakeside Timberley Recreation Center. And of course, as someone in the community, someone involved with young people in the Lions Club, and someone involved with various sports activities, I of course knew of the Recreation Center in Lakeside, an old renovated school. And in that school are the Citizens of Patrol office, volunteer people, of course, very important to the RCMP in our community. The recreation staff is present there, and let me tell you, the recreation staff make you feel welcome from the moment you come in to that renovated old school. But also in the BLT Recreation Center, Mr. Speaker, is the social workers office for the western region of Halifax County. So I have had the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to work closely with these professionals and see how they handle many of the people that come into their office day after day. And it's a great privilege to let you know that there are many people that I've come to my office looking for assistance, looking for advice, looking for someone to listen to, and I've said to them, let's make an appointment next door. They might not be able to take you today because of what they've got scheduled, but there is a social worker in this office next to mine who's willing to listen to your concerns and is willing to assist you in whatever way he or she can. And over the years that I've been in this position as the MLA for Timberley Prospect, I've come to know and respect each and every one of the social workers who work out of the Beachville Lakeside Timberley Recreation Center. And let me tell you, that respect is based upon the fact that they're out there on the front lines. You know, these social workers do not just sit in their office and shuffle papers. These social workers are frontline workers. They visit homes. They visit people in their situations. They know firsthand, as frontline workers, when it comes to assisting citizens in our community, what are the circumstances of the people in the situations in which many of them are forced to live. So it's a great resource that you have as the MLA when you can speak in a confidential manner on some issues, but also on a personal matter, because you can go to the social worker who has been in the same home that you've been in, who's been at the same kitchen table that you've been at, who's shared a cup of tea with a senior or heard the situation with a young mother and faced some of the issues, because then you begin to realize that position as a social worker is a job that I necessarily wouldn't want to do. And I say that with the respect, of course, for the profession, but more and more and more social workers have expressed to me their frustration with the system. Their frustration with the fact they consider themselves professionals who are able to make individual and personal decisions. But over the last number of years, and many of it under the watch of that minister, the latitude, the ability of social workers to be able to make decisions on an individual basis, it just isn't there. Instead, more and more of these social workers say it's like taking a round peg and trying to put it in a square hole, because after a while, you know it's just not going to fit. You know in your heart of hearts, based upon your experience, that this particular young single mother perhaps needs assistance, perhaps needs a little flexibility, perhaps needs a break, perhaps needs someone who's going to say, I'm going to go that extra mile for that young mother, and I'm going to assist her. But then you check the rule books, and you check the guidelines, and then you check downtown, and you've got to make sure that you are answering to all of those other bureaucrats who are not out there in the front line, who've never been at the kitchen table with this young mother as she discusses the fact that she doesn't have enough food for her children when they come home from school. That's the issue that many social workers face each and every day as they come to their office, pick up their assignments for the day, and then off they go to various parts of the community that I'm fortunate enough to represent. Those social workers, as frontline people, they are a valuable asset. Because, Mr. Speaker, in this country and in this province, we believe in assisting those in a vulnerable position. We believe in assisting those less fortunate among us. And in many cases, the very first people to identify the needs, to identify the particular personal interests of whatever the interest and case is the social worker. And those social workers, they are there as professionals to assist with each and every one of the people who are under their care, which of course brings us to another issue. More and more social workers are not just expressing frustration with the guidelines and the bureaucrats they have to answer to, they are concerned about the increasing caseload. More and more people responsible to less and less social workers. And the member from Cape Breton South, based upon his own experience, and the member from Dartmouth Portland Valley made the point that perhaps we need less bean counters and more people on the ground, or maybe we need more people at the kitchen table, listening to the concerns of Nova Scotians, listening to those who need the assistance which we have to give them in a society that's fair, objective, and has a conscience. And in the community that I represent, let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, the conscience of the community in many times are the social workers. The social workers who will approach us as members of the Lions Club, who will approach the local church that I'm a member of, and say, we can't do anything more than what we're allowed to do right now, but this particular person needs more help than I can give them. Can the Lions Club get involved? Can the local church assist? And let me tell you, tonight, Mr. Speaker, in my community, at 7 o'clock in the Sacred Heart Church Hall in Lakeside, I'm going to have the opportunity to attend a meeting about establishing a food bank in my community. A food bank. A food bank that is necessary because of the fact of the needs of many of the people in the community who don't have the advantages that I personally have, or I would assume all of us in this house have. And you know, the people that will be at that meeting tonight, they'll be numbered as teachers who will come forward who've been invited. There will be members of the clergy who are there. There will be members of the service clubs in the community, the Lions Club in particular, of which I'm fortunate enough to be a member. And there will also be social workers present. Those people together will now begin to make the case, as we prefer, for the long winter ahead. The long winter ahead and the challenges which many of us are going to try to assist the people in our community. And who are those frontline workers who are identifying those people in need for us, for me as the MLA, for myself as the member of the Lions Club, for the members of the clergy, the social workers that I am fortunate enough to work with in my community? Those people are the key resource who will be attending that meeting tonight in my community. In particular, I would like to compliment the Association of Social Workers for their instructive knowledge and making sure that as legislators, we knew exactly what was going to be required of them to make this legislation work. There are some very matter-of-fact suggestions here, that one in particular that deals with graduation. And it seems to me, when I look at it, if someone currently finishes their social work program in May and the next convocation is in October, these people are not eligible to practice until they actually have the degree in hand, which of course you receive at convocation. This amendment that is included in this piece of legislation allows these social workers to register as candidates so that they can then move on to assist us in our communities and continue with their career. A common sense piece of legislation. That particular clause is, of course, alone one of the reasons that this caucus supports this piece of legislation. So with those few comments, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my place. I again want to compliment the profession of social workers, thank them for what they contribute to our province and to our communities. I look forward to continuing to work with them as the MLA in my community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize Minister of Education. Close debate.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to help or thank the members of the opposition for their support of this legislation, for recognizing the contribution to community services in the province that our forethinking minister has. And with those few comments, I'd like to close debate on Bill 228.
The motion is for second reading of Bill 228. Is the House ready for the question? Will all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye? Aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 228, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 12 of the Acts of 1993, the Social Workers Act.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee of Law Amendments, and I recognize the Deputy House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under government motions, public bills for second reading, I ask for you to call Bill number 230, Housing Development Corporation Act.
Bill number 230, Housing Development Corporation Act, and I recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, once again, on behalf of my colleague, the Minister of Community Services, I'm pleased to rise in my place to say a few words about an act to amend Chapter 213 of the revised statutes of 1989, the Housing Development Act. As members of the House know, the Auditor General reviews operations in particular departments and particular divisions of particular departments on a periodic basis. One of the recommendations that was made by the Auditor General with respect to the operation of the Housing Development Corporation is that the Act be amended to allow the Housing Development Corporation to have an auditor who, other than the Auditor General, as the legislation currently permits, only the Auditor General can be the official auditor of this Housing Development Corporation Act. And the Auditor General, the last time he reviewed this, did suggest that an external auditor be, that the Act be amended so that an external auditor would be permitted. And Mr. Speaker, with those few words of introduction, I'm pleased to move second reading of an act to amend Chapter 213 of the revised statutes of 1989, the Housing Development Corporation Act.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm honoured to rise on this bill today, Bill number 230. When I first heard that the government was bringing a bill in for Housing Development Corporation Act, I was pretty excited until I opened up the bill and looked at it and saw that it was 2 lines to do with a financial audit. And
line by line.
You know, yeah, speak on it line by line. But I was hoping there would be more in this Bill 230 to deal with some of the real problems at housing that we have in the province today. Some of these problems we have today. I'll give you an example of constituency of Cape Breton Nova. And Bill 230, Mr. Speaker. Cape Breton Nova, there's over 400 people on the waiting list to get into housing, Mr. Speaker. That's family units. Over 200 waiting for seniors housing in the CBRM, Mr. Speaker. This waiting list is way too long for too many people, and it's only going to get worse with the price of home heating oil this winter. Every day in the office, in my office, if I don't receive at least 6 to 8, maybe 10 calls a day about Island Housing Authority, people looking for affordable housing. Now, this Bill 230 deals with somebody doing a financial audit of where they're spending the money. But I'd personally like to know where they're spending my money myself, Mr. Speaker. You know, they're not spending any of it in Cape Breton. I think they signed a deal there just recently for $57 million for the federal infrastructure program along with the Nova Scotia housing, and yet we still don't see one affordable housing unit built in Cape Breton. Not one. And I remember last year, I think my memory quite serves me right here, is that I remember the Minister of Community Services, and he always thanks you for the questions. So I remember him thanking me for asking him the question about, you know, a very polite minister, and said, well, I thank you for the question. And I said to him that Cape Breton will get its fair share. I think that's what he had said. And we looked in Hansard a while back, You know, Cape Breton will get its fair share. A big goose egg.
Big round zero.
A big round zero in that housing, you know. Mr. Speaker, that's our fair share. You know, you can wonder why the CBRM is up in arms about equalization, you know, when we look at some of these issues here, but we won't go into that matter. This Bill 230 is about housing and an audit of housing. Now, yesterday I drove in from Cape Breton, and I just happened to get a call on my cell phone that there was a question and answer period here yesterday in the Red Room where the Minister of Community Services was going to meet with the Halifax Coalition Anti-Poverty. And I attended that meeting, not in my suit or anything else, in my travel clothes with my gym pants and jacket on, and I listened to, I fit it right in there, and I sat down and listened to the people's concerns and listened to them about affordable housing for people with disabilities. There's no affordable housing for people with disabilities. And one of the major concerns that these people had was affordable housing support programs when people are in housing. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know this Bill 230 is about audits, but it gives me an opportunity to stand here and say that this affordable housing program has been at least I'm terrible in the sense that there's nobody that's been able to access any affordable housing. I forget how many units we have. I don't think we have over 100 units built in the province of Nova Scotia. And of those units, how many of those units are built with people with disabilities, Mr. Speaker? And then we can get into the home preservation program. The program that they said that they were going to have senior citizens, where they were going to spend money to have seniors been able to stay in their homes longer than rather going to nursing homes or long-term care. I don't understand how this can be when they haven't built any of those units. They haven't been able to give out those grants. Now, there's people at home are saying that, you know, I applied for a grant, and yet there's no money left in the budget. Here it is in October, and there's no money left in the budget for any more of these emergency, what they call RAP, Rehabilitation Residential Assistance Program. And I noticed that the Minister of Energy came out this week past and said about his energy policy. And in that policy, for two people to qualify, it'd have to be at $25,000 for income. But what I'm trying to say here is that I wish that the government would raise the level for two people for income to apply for those RAP grants from $20,000 to $25,000. Because I have at least 10, 15 people that have applied that were turned down over $120 over the grant, $1,000 over the grant. I mean, so this about auditing the Housing Development Corporation Act, that's important because I surely would love to know where they're spending the money, you know, because I know they're not spending it in Cape Breton. You know, every day, I think every MLA that's in Cape Breton, whether it's the minister in Cape Breton North, or my colleague in Cape Breton Centre, our colleague in Cape Breton South, and all these, your telephone constantly ringing about affordable housing, about Island Housing Authority. So where are they spending the money? So maybe with this new auditing, they may be able to come back in and say that where they are spending the money at. You know, average rent in the HRM is $537 for a one-bedroom apartment. The HRM two-bedroom apartment is $720 a month. The vacancy rate is about 3% in Halifax, you know. The heating oil prices. I mean, there's going to be, like my colleague had said earlier, a colleague from Timberley Prospect, and so eloquently put it, that it's going to people are either going to heat their homes or not have food, or there's going to be a choice there where they're not going to be able, you know. They need energy assistance program. But this affordable housing, it's an issue, Mr. Speaker, for all of us that are in public life, for all of us that are members of the Legislative Assembly, that we do not have enough affordable housing units built in the province of Nova Scotia. If that was the case, Mr. Speaker, my casework load would be cut in half if there was enough units built. Years ago, they used to have these units, and I think other members that were elected before my time would realize that right now they're sending contracts out in the CBRM for getting 10 units ready at a time. And the contract comes in on Saturday's Cape Breton Post, and then you'll see they get 10 units ready. It might be 2 in Sydney Mines, 1 in North Sydney, 2 in Sydney, 1 in Whitney Pier, 1 in Glace Bay, 1 in the Waterford. That's the 10. So those 10 units are done a contract. At one time, they used to have, I think they were called winter works programs, where people would come in and you'd be able to have 40 or 50 people working on to get these homes ready. You know, so there's those programs are gone by the wayside now, and contracting out getting 10 ready at a time. So bill number 230 on the financial audit is very important that we do know where the government is you know, spending their money. and where they're not spending it, you know. Thank you, my colleague from Dartmouth, telling me where they're not, Dartmouth East, and where they're not spending it, you know what I mean? But also, you know, I think we look at that problem of homeless people could get a lot worse here in the HRM if some of the buildings were inspected and some of the bylaws were enforced. As I drive into the community and realize if that was happening, some of these landlords, some of these people wouldn't be living in these buildings. But also some of the issues that the people brought up yesterday at that meeting. They brought up issues about support. Support. They need more money for support for affordable housing. When they're in that program, they're beyond the budget to pay their housing, or, you know, to have somebody pay their housing and for them until they get back on their feet, people with disabilities. I mean, Bill 230, Mr. Speaker, I know it's a deal with auditing, but I mean, I personally, again, I repeat myself, so I'd like to know where they're spending the money. You know, and I thought the session with the minister went relatively quick. They were using a timer, so I guess the people asking the questions had about 4 or 5 minutes, and the minister had a minute to answer the question. So very difficult in that type of scenario for them to answer the question. But I think I remember my colleague from Dartmouth East was in a march along with these people from the HCAP, they call themselves, and she went along for the day and to help them. And so with the $57 million in the affordable housing program from the federal government, the provincial government, this audit will be welcome news, because we'll find out where they're spending the money. Oh, yeah. You know, because I know they're not spending the money in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, because a zero, not one unit built. So I mean, you know, we had a project that was there and the project fell through. You know, well, I don't know, my colleague from Timberley Prospect is saying traveling allowance for the bureaucrats, but when we have people that need emergency repairs and there's no money left in the budget after 6 months of the budget coming in March, there's something wrong. There's something wrong, you know. We need more non-profit, public, affordable housing. That, you know, we need safe, affordable housing for these people with and also people with disabilities. If they build 24 units today, half of those units should be for people with disabilities. So we'll know where this Bill 230 is, where they're going to spend their money at, Mr. Speaker. It's important to know where the government's spending their money, especially when you're accountable as a member of the Legislative Assembly to the electorate that puts you in there, your constituents, and the people that come to your office to be responsible where they're spending the money on affordable housing. And we have such a need for affordable housing in the Cape Breton area, and the HRM also. This is a common theme that we hear all the time as MLAs. You know, throughout the province of Nova Scotia, from one end to the other, we find, you know, and I remember the minister saying yesterday, well, I thought I remember something about children aged 16 years of age, between 16 and 18, that kind of fall through the gaps and everything else. So,
walk down the street,
you know,
homeless people right now.
well, if I was to leave this legislature right now as I'm standing here and walk down the street of Hollis Street or any of the streets here, I would see homeless people right here, Mr. Speaker, right now, you know, and pushing a grocery cart. And I don't know if you ever seen the movie Radio, you know, to look at that with pushing the grocery cart, you know. My colleague from Timberley Prospect's familiar with that in his writing also. The Ham government would rather give the share of the affordable housing funding to landlords in the form of rent supplements. That's not how we should be spending our money. Bill 230 calls for us an audit of where they're spending the money, Mr. Speaker. So are we giving it for rent supplements, or should we be building affordable housing units? You know, public style affordable housing. You know, yeah, we need the best bang for our buck. We need all of us as members of the Legislative Assembly to come together and say, look, we have to provide affordable housing. We have to know where they're going to be spending the money. Where is the best money to be spent? On the cooperative housing, public housing? Where do we build these units?
Habitat for Humanity
You know,
can build a house in 6 weeks.
Yeah, so I mean, how could the Habitat of Humanity build a house in 6 weeks?
With volunteers.
With volunteers. And here we are with $57 million in the bank in the federal provincial program, and we haven't built one unit in Cape Breton. So again, I refer back to Bill 230 and the audit of where it's going to be spent. You know, so I mean, I'm just wondering, Mr. Speaker, I would know possibly if this audit was done in a proper manner where these units were being built.
Amazing.
How many units were being built and how much money was being spent and who the money was going to build these units. I think that's important. I know the bill is quite small and talks about auditing, but when I was really excited and thought that, well, you know, Housing Development Corporation Act Bill 230, And I said, oh boy, well maybe there's going to be something in here to raise some hopes of people that are living on the streets, or people that can't afford housing. And I mean, and I look at this, I don't think so at all. I mean, and we heard a lot, and I know the minister heard all the concerns of the people yesterday in that forum over there in the Red Room, and still there'll be no money spent in that area. I don't know, I think Alberta has built over 3,000 homes, and other provinces have built thousands of homes, and here we are in the province of Nova Scotia. We're lucky to have, 21 homes built or 100 homes built, who knows? I know they built 15 in Middleton, I think, and another 6 or so here in Halifax, but I mean, we're lagging so far behind. So maybe with this audit in Bill 230, we'll be able to know where the money is being spent and how much money of that, this bill was, I think the affordable housing, my memory serves me right, was signed in 2002 in September when that bill was first signed at that time, and it was $37 million, and I think now, and I said before earlier, I think it's gone up to a total of $57 million. So with this audit being reported to us as members of the Legislative Assembly, we'll be able to know where they're spending their money, how they're focusing on dealing with such a serious problem as housing in this province. But again, I'd like to go back with this RAP program, the Residential Rehabilitation Assistance Program, as we call it in Cape Breton, RAP, and the people falling through the cracks and not been able. There's that limit in there for a family of 2 at $20,000. Now, that limit it should be, in my personal view, should be up to $25,000 to enable more low-income seniors. Bill 230, Mr. Speaker, when the government made their first announcement on the second stage of that bill, and they decided that bill was they were signed and it went up to $57 million, pretty excited that we're going to have some kind of housing built here. But again, we still see zero housing in Cape Breton. But like I said, the senior citizens that are following that gap, we're trying to say in society that we want senior citizens to stay in their own homes. But if we cannot provide grants, emergency repair grants for furnaces, windows, doors, insulation, for them to make their homes more energy efficient, so we do know that this Bill 230 is about auditing, Mr. Speaker. But I think there's so much more that could have been put in that bill. Actually, that bill should have been 2 or 3 inches thick if we really wanted to deal with the Housing Development Corporation Act in a proper manner, Mr. Speaker. I think that, there's lots of surveys out there on the homeless and the HRM. 35% of respondents cited housing-related reasons such as the lack of affordable housing, eviction, fire, unsafe premises as their immediate concerns and cause of homelessness. And I do know that even in why these people are out on the street, but how can we decide, or how can we look at as a government where the money is being spent? Well, hopefully in this Bill 230, that'll help us determine where the government is best getting the bang for their dollars. Hopefully that, some of the things we talked about today about grants, home preservation program for seniors, other programs to help them stay in their homes, to help with some of the septic tanks and wells, and but there's just I just wonder how much of the budget is already gone in the Cape Breton Island Housing Authority. How much of it was spent? Well, with this Bill 230 in the audit, we'd be able to know how much was spent in each year. So I think it's important that we do know how much the Department, the Minister of Community Services, and the Housing Department are spending on affordable housing. I spoke to the director of Island Housing Authority last week, and she assured me that they were going to do an extra 20, they would have 20 units ready by next week. 20 units for people of 400 on a waiting list. Where are they spending their money? I had another senior on Lingan Road that sent an application to housing and said, well, we'd love to help and everything else, but it looks like right now there's no more money left in the budget. No more money left in the budget. So with this Bill 230, we know what was in the budget and what was being spent, Mr. Speaker. I just think that, with the home heating oil, there's going to be so many people coming to your office or calling you as an elected representative wondering, can they get into affordable housing? They're not going to be able to heat their homes. So what they're looking at now, they're coming to MLA's offices and saying, I need to get into housing. I need housing. I need public housing. But we as a government and we as a society, we cannot provide that because we don't have the housing stock. At one time, a year or so, or maybe 2 years ago when I first got elected, Mr. Speaker, there was lots of stock. And the Island Housing Authority decided they had so much stock up on Church Street that they were going to rent it out at $4.50 a flat rate and started putting people in there. But since we were going through an energy crisis and people are having a hard time paying $800 to fill a 200-gallon tank, that's why we have this housing problem we have today. Now, this Bill 230, about Housing Development Corporation Act, it's about time that we do know where the money is being spent. What regions of Nova Scotia are getting money for grants? What regions of Nova Scotia are getting money for the home preservation program? Those types of things are important to us as members of the Legislative Assembly. But I mean, to get rid of some of these people that are living in unsafe premises, that's why they're living on the streets and otherwise. 66.7% of families have unaffordable housing. 1 in every 5 children in Nova Scotia live in poverty, Mr. Speaker. Now, I know Bill 230 is about auditing the books about housing, Mr. Speaker. And people living in their cars while waiting for their hearing at a residential tenancy board. We've had an incident last year as well reported in the news media about a family living in a vehicle while they're waiting for affordable housing, Mr. Speaker. Think about the people with mental illness. This again is why I bring back to what they had asked the minister yesterday, and the Minister of Community Services in there telling them people with disabilities, they need affordable housing support. They just don't need the housing. They need somebody to support them until they get their lives, in somewhat of an order so they can have a roof over their head and heat, and help these people. Now, this Bill 230, doing with the Housing Development Corporation Act, is about auditing. So I think it's important that, somebody else can have a look at the books, and make sure that the money that we're spending and the taxpayers in Nova Scotia are spending is going in the proper manner, Mr. Speaker. 45% of homeless Canadians are on the street because of job loss, inadequate income, or eviction, Mr. Speaker. These are known facts. These are known facts that we have people living in poverty, people living on the streets because they can't have affordable housing. And it's only going to get worse this year as it goes along with the price of oil, the 80 cents a litre for filling their tanks and costing $800 to fill a tank and those types of things. So, yes, and I guess it's also things, how do you find employment when you don't have a home? How do you find employment when you have nowhere for somebody to call you to go to work? Those are things, I just wish that, this was not a problem in society, but it is a problem. It's a problem here in the province of Nova Scotia. It's a problem that's not going to go away. It's a problem that we as members of the Legislative Assembly have to deal with. So with Bill 230 and the Housing Development Corporation Act, hopefully we'll be able to know where the money is being spent. And these seniors, I think, that have applied for grants that fall between the cracks. Again, I go back to the point of, I find that limit of $20,000 for low-income families. And I remember the advertisement that I was driving home one weekend from Halifax on the radio. It said, the government has announced an affordable housing, low-income to moderate-income housing, Mr. Speaker. Now, I know that Bill 230 is about financial audit. And I just think that it's important to know, like I said, it's important that we understand that affordable housing is a big issue here. And hopefully this bill, Mr. Speaker, will help deal with that. And I'll wrap it up right now, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you very much for your time. And I'll move adjournment and debate, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Motion is to adjourn debate. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. I recognize the Honourable Deputy House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, tomorrow is Opposition Day. I ask that you recognize the Liberal House Leader so that he has an opportunity to address the House hours, the House business, and adjourn tonight's session.
Thank you. I'll recognize the House Leader, Liberal Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow the House will sit from 2 p.m. until 6 p.m. Following the daily routine and question period, we'll be calling Bill 223 and Bill 175. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, Bill 175 will be called first and 223 following. I move that this House do now adjourn until 2 p.m. tomorrow.
Motion is for the House to adjourn until 2 p.m. tomorrow. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Contrary minded? House is adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow. The subject for tonight's late debate was submitted by the Honourable Member for Cape Breton South, and it reads, therefore, be it resolved that the government review its long-term care facility placement policies. And having said that, I will now recognize the Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tonight I would like to say a few words on our Departments of Health's long-term care facility placement policy. And more specifically, Mr. Speaker, how this policy needs to ensure that cultural and linguistic needs of Acadians and Francophones in Nova Scotia are considered when admitting patients to nursing homes that are under the Department of Health's mandate. Mr. Speaker, right now, this long-term care facility placement policy does not, and I repeat, does not ensure that cultural and linguistic needs of Acadians and Francophones are considered when they are admitted to long-term care facilities. So, Mr. Speaker, the department, the government needs to ensure that cultural and linguistic needs of Acadians and Francophones are considered, and I'll tell you why. Just imagine, Mr. Speaker, an elderly Francophone person who can't speak or understand one word of English.